I'm curious to know how many of you have seen a production of Les Misérables. If you've seen a Broadway production of it, or a touring production of it, or a local community production of it, will you raise your hand? Okay, I thought so. Lots of you. You know, I think Les Mis is probably the most influential musical of our generation. Last month, I was reading the newspaper and saw an obituary for a young man named Peter Johnson. And Peter was just 21 years old when he died. And the obituary mentioned that Peter loved Les Mis. He would try to see every version of it he could. And Peter probably would be here with us today if he was still walking the earth. But you know, it's rare to see a play or a film mentioned in an obituary. But that's the power of Les Misérables. Its story and its music affect us in a profound way. The show opened on Broadway in 1987. I remember it well. Before I went into the ministry, I was in musical theater in New York, and I decided to go to seminary in 1986, the year before Les Mis opened. Had I known that it was coming to Broadway and what it was about and knew its music, there's a good chance I would have delayed going to seminary. And when I went to see the show, I was both inspired and sick to my stomach because most of the cast was made up of men. Most of the cast was made up of men my age. And the style of the show's music was the style I was best suited for. Friends I had auditioned with, friends that had been in shows with me, were in the production I was watching on Broadway. And so I knew that if I had stayed in theater, I probably could have gotten into that show, if not the original cast, then maybe later on, since it ran for such a long time. For about 3 years, I had wrestled with whether or not I should stay in theater or go to seminary. And finally, I came to a place in my mind and heart where I felt I could no longer not spend the rest of my life promoting the gospel. And so I left theater, kind of. I just quit making it my career, kind of. Went to seminary, but Les Mis is so filled with the gospel. I probably could have been fulfilled by doing that show for a long time. So it's probably a very good thing that Les Misérables and I missed each other. You know, I was so impressed with the show's theological implications that soon after it opened on Broadway, I wrote a research paper about it while at Princeton. As part of my research, I read the novel by Victor Hugo, which is about the biggest book I've ever read, about 1,500 pages, but it's well worth it. If you like the show, you will like it even more if you read the book. It gives the characters in the musical much more depth and meaning, and I'll give you an example of that in a minute. I also did research on Victor Hugo, the man who gave us this incredible story. You know, he had great compassion for the poor, for the down and out, the miserable. He became involved in politics and with social justice issues. He was frustrated with the church. He saw clergy as buying into politics and into power and not serving the church's main mission, helping those in need. And when Victor Hugo died, he left 5 sentences as his last will and testament. He said, "I leave 50,000 francs to the poor. I want to be buried in their hearse." That is, he didn't want special treatment. He wanted to be in a plain coffin, treated just like those who were poor when they were buried. Then he said, "I refuse funeral orations of all churches. I beg a prayer to all souls." And then lastly he wrote, "I believe in God." God. Hugo gave us his ideal image of a Christian through his character, Bishop Muriel, the priest who helped Jean Valjean. And the scene with the bishop and Jean Valjean is at the very beginning of the show. You know that if you've seen it. It's only like 5 or 10 minutes long. But without it, there is no show, because it's through the bishop that Jean Valjean is transformed. In the novel, we learn much more about Bishop Muriel. In fact, he is part of the first 113 pages of the book. And one of the things we learn about him is that he was from a very wealthy family. And kind of like Francis of Assisi, he decides to leave his life of wealth and comfort to be a minister to anyone in need. He has made a vow of poverty, except for one exception. He has kept one thing from his past, one thing to help remind him of where he came from, to remind him of his family. And you know what that was? The silver. The silver place settings and the silver candlesticks, you see, that which he gave away to Jean Valjean. Catholic writer Teresa Malcolm says, Monsignor Muriel never again appears in the story, but he is the soul of the novel. He who sowed love where there was hatred, light where there was darkness. Of course, the two main characters of the story are Jean Valjean and Inspector Javert. Valjean, the ex-con whose life is transformed by the kindness of the bishop, and Javert, a man obsessed by the law and obsessed with the pursuit and punishment of Jean Valjean. Now, if you said, I want to find someone who is both Javert and Valjean, I want to combine the two, you would have to look no further than the Apostle Paul. Paul had been a Pharisee, a student of the religious laws of his people. Like Javert, he was on a mission going from village to village, town to town, rooting out Christians in an effort to eradicate them, breathing murderous threats against them. Like Javert, Paul seems to have this personal vendetta against them and a deep-seated hatred against these early Christians who were not following the law. But then, like Jean Valjean, all of it changes for Paul in a moment. When he was on his way to round up more Christians, Paul has a dramatic experience with God on the road to Damascus. And instead of being obsessed by the law, he becomes obsessed by love. He even writes the most influential description of love ever written. Love is patient and kind. Love is not envious or boastful. You know it. Faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. And so instead of preaching the law, as he had been doing, Paul starts preaching grace. And the best part of all of this is not fiction. This is not a novel. It really happened. And this man who was the world's biggest Christian persecutor becomes the world's biggest Christian promoter. It's an unbelievable transformation. What transformed him is something we call grace. Last week we heard a lot about the word mercy when Pope Francis was in our country. That's an important Christian word, mercy. We need more mercy. But mercy is not the same as grace. Those two words often appear together, but they are not synonyms. The difference between them is subtle but significant. Mercy is not getting what we deserved. Grace is getting something that we don't deserve. Mercy is not getting what we deserve. Grace is getting something that we don't deserve. If you are speeding and a policeman pulls you over but decides not to give you a ticket, you just experienced mercy. You didn't get what you deserved. Grace is getting something you don't deserve. If you are speeding and a policeman pulls you over and he decides to give you $100, you have experienced grace. Or nirvana, right? It's an undeserved gift. And so the bishop offers Jean Valjean mercy. He doesn't tell the police that Jean Valjean stole the silverware, but better yet, the bishop offers Valjean grace by giving him the candlesticks. Mercy is fine and can be transforming in itself, but grace is what puts it over the top. Grace is what makes life more meaningful and fulfilling. And so the big question of the day, and I would argue that it's the most important question in your life, of your existence, is do you live a grace-filled life? Do you live a grace-filled life? And I mean that in two ways. First, do you recognize that everything is gift? That everything is gift, that God has blessed you. You see, I think this is the most important question for your life because it affects how you see yourself and the world. It shapes your attitude and how you experience life. You hear about people going on mission trips to Africa and other parts of the world and seeing people and children in great poverty, and yet they have this special spirit about them. You go, how in the world can they be so happy? They don't have anything. But you know that they have something you don't have, or at least they have more of it. They are living a grace-filled life. In the 12th chapter of Paul's letter to the Romans, there's a sentence I want to highlight. It's the 3rd verse. Paul writes, "For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, the only accurate way to understand ourselves is by what God is and by what God does for us, not by what we are and what we do for God." Let me say that one more time. The only accurate way to understand ourselves is by what God is and by what God has done for us, not by what we are and what we do for God. Jean Valjean travels a lot through the story. He's always on the run, on the move. And if you saw the show, you may have noticed that he always takes the candlesticks with him. This is even more pronounced and highlighted in the book. If I had been Jean Valjean, I probably would have sold them. Let's get some money from this. But the candlesticks for him are powerful reminders of God's grace. They appear over and over again throughout the story as visible reminders of the undeserved gifts that God gave him and continues to give him. Do you have something that reminds you that everything is gift? That everything is grace? What are your candlesticks? What are your candlesticks in life? I would suggest that one thing that can be a good candlestick for you, one thing that can remind you that everything is gift, that reminds you of grace, is the church. A place of worship. That is one thing we can do habitually to remind ourselves to live a grace-filled life. And it's one of the reasons I'm so concerned about the demise of the church in our culture. We live in a culture of entitlement, a culture of anger and bitterness and greed, lots of greed. We can't get enough. We have talked ourselves into believing that we actually deserve it, and even more. That we deserve it more than others. More than those who don't look like us, or speak like us, or behave like us, or don't vote like us. So I encourage you to find some candlesticks. Be like Jean Valjean and carry something with you to remind you that everything is grace, everything is gift. Find different symbols that remind you of who you are and who God is, and what God has done and continues to do for you and me. It will change your life and make your life more fulfilling and meaningful. I said there were two ways I want to encourage us to live a grace-filled life. The second way is to be like Bishop Muriel and to offer grace to others. To be the hands and feet of Christ, to give some candlesticks away, to offer undeserved gifts to those who come into your life. Are you doing that? That's what Jean Valjean did. That's how he lived when Javert is caught by the revolutionaries. Valjean asked if he could watch the prisoner. This time, ironically, Javert is the prisoner, right? That Javert is the prisoner. But what does Jean Valjean do? He lets Javert go. He offers him grace, an undeserved gift. Those of you who know the story know that unfortunately Javert cannot accept grace, ends up committing suicide. And I think that's a powerful metaphor for us. If we don't live a grace-filled life, if we don't accept grace and embrace it, then we are bound to a life of chaos and depression and destruction and negativity. You know, what's ironic is that all that we have talked about today was seen in the life of the one who founded this denomination. John Wesley was a man who was obsessed with rules and following the laws, feeling he had to earn God's love and blessing. He was at one of the lowest points in his life when he attended a prayer meeting on Aldersgate Street in England. He didn't want to go, but fortunately he went, because while he was there, he was given some candlesticks. They came to him in the form of Luther's commentary on Paul's letter to the Romans. The letter Kathy read to us today, the letter that gave us the verse, the only accurate way to understand ourselves is by what God is and by what God does for us, not by what we are and what we do for God. John Wesley wrote in his diary that while he was on Aldersgate at this meeting, his heart felt strangely warmed. And he came to trust in God's love for him, and that he was saved from the law of sin and death. That he realized that there was nothing he could do to earn God's love. It was a gift. He realized he didn't need to earn God's love. It was a gift. It was grace. And you know what happened? Just as Jean Valjean was transformed, just as Paul was transformed, John Wesley changed. He started living a more fulfilling and joyful life. He started living a grace-filled life, and it made him start caring for others better. He started giving grace to others. He started helping the down and out. He started helping the people in prison. He got an old army building and he called it the Foundry. And he basically made it into a Salvation Army, Goodwill Industries kind of place for the poor. Many historians believe that England would have had an internal revolution by the common people, just as they had in France, just as it was in Les Misérables, had it not been for the Wesleyan movement to help the poor. to help those in need. And it all started with a candlestick experience on Aldersgate Street. In the original story, when Jean Valjean first meets Bishop Muriel, Valjean says, "Listen here, my name is Jean Valjean. I was a convict. I have spent 19 years in prison," and he goes on to tell how he's been trying to survive transitioning into the world, but things are not going well. No one will help him. And the bishop invites Valjean into his house, and Valjean says, "Are you sure? Did you not understand? My name is Jean Valjean. I was a convict." And the bishop says, "Why would I have to know your name? Besides, before you told me, I knew it." Valjean opened his eyes in surprise. "Really? You knew my name?" "Yes," answered the bishop. "Your name is my brother." Let us recognize and embrace the grace that's been given to us. And let us extend grace to others, our sisters, our brothers. Brother, let me be your servant. Let me be as Christ to you. Pray that I might have the grace to let you be my servant too. We are pilgrims on a journey. We are travelers on the road. We are here to help each other walk the mile and bear the load. I will hold the Christ light for you in the nighttime of your fear. I will hold my hand out to you, speak the peace you long to hear. I will weep when you are weeping. When you laugh, I'll laugh with you. I will share your joy and sorrow till we've seen this journey through. Sister, let me be your servant. Let me be as Christ to you. Pray that I might have the grace to let you be my servant too."